now we have learned the causes and the factors that ultimately gave rise to the revolt of 1857, which is also known as the First War of Independence. Now, in order to understand the significance of the revolt of 1857, we need to go through the course of the exact event, and also the nature of the event, which would ultimately bring out the significance of the uprising or the revolt of 1857. So till now we have seen the fact that due to various factors, whether it was political, economic or socio-religious, evoked these sepoys and the Indian army personnel who were in the British army to fall against the British. So they were now angry about these new policies that the British were bringing out, and they gathered together to give birth to a rebellion, to a revolt against the domination of the British colonizers. So we can see that the sepoys have now started to plan the course of their uprising and how they would want to go ahead with it. Now, if you remember, while discussing the various causes of the revolt of 1857, we have seen that the final blow was given when the entire factor of Enfield rifles came up. So what happened exactly was the cartridges that were to be used to fill the Enfield rifles were rumored to be greased with the fat of the cows and pigs. Now this entire thing was clashing with the religious ideas of the Hindu and Muslim sepoys who were in the British army, and they were angry with the fact that British colonizers had inflicted such a policy on them, and therefore they wanted to go ahead and revolt the dominance of the British and get into the debacle where they could remove the British once and for all. So we see that the first breakout happens in Barrackpur in 1857 in the Bengal regiment, where Mangal Pandey rose to rebellion, and he stated that the rifles, Enfield rifles by the British, won't be used by the Indian army personnel. Now on stating that, he was taken captive, of course, and then court-martialed and finally hanged. Now this rebellion that Mangal Pandey had started was carried forward by the other Indian soldiers when they sort of went ahead and brought out the other army personnel who were taken captive into the jail for not using the Enfield rifles. Now this happened in Meerut in 1857 after Barrackpur. So we see that these army personnel were brought out by the other sepoys, and together they marched for Delhi. Now once they marched and reached Delhi, they headed for Bahadur Shah II, who was the then Mughal emperor. But Bahadur Shah was only a nominal head and had very little powers in his hand. So what exactly did they want? They wanted Bahadur Shah II to lead this rebellion, to become the leader. So Bahadur Shah wrote to all other kingdoms in India and their leaders to come forward and unite against the British and take this rebellion, take this revolt forward. So we see ultimately that Delhi was captured by Bahadur Shah II and the army under him. But when this exact thing happened, the Britishers were taken aback because they never would have thought that the Indians could even rebel against them. So you can understand that the Britishers were caught aback, and they were in a very shameful state, because Delhi, which was the main seat of power of the Mughal emperor, was taken away from the Britishers. So they of course wanted to hit back on the Indian sepoys, and with the help of John Nicholson, we see that the reinforcements are coming in from Punjab, and they recaptured Delhi by September 1857. Now, the rebellion, if you remember, arose from Barrackpur, from Meerut. So basically, a few pockets were uprising in rebellion in 1857. So what the British, military exactly did was that they headed for the regiments which were supporting the British government. So they brought in the Punjab regiment, the Sikh regiment, the Gurkhas, and all these people who were supporting British in sort of repressing the particular revolt. So we see that after these reinforcements have come in and after Delhi has been recaptured, Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II was captured and deported to Rangoon. So ultimately the center of revolt per se at that point of time in the starting of the rebellion was recaptured and Bahadur Shah deported. Now, though Delhi was captured and then recaptured, Delhi wasn't really the seat of the rebellion or the main hold of the rebellion, because the rebellion rose and it spread all throughout the subcontinent in various parts and pockets. The first one is Lucknow, which was led by Begum Hazrat Mahal. So Begum Hazrat Mahal was Wajid Ali Shah's, Nawab Wajid Ali Shah's wife, who was, if you remember, deported to Bengal after Awadh was annexed by the British in the view of the subsidiary alliance that the Nawab had signed. Now this had angered the Begum, and she led the revolt of 1857 from Lucknow, which was the capital of Awadh. Now, when these revolts are, taking their lead at that point of time, we see the Britishers weren't really prepared for these pockets to rise up in rebellion per se. So what exactly happened is these British, military personnel in high officials, they did not have a place where they could hide or they could move quickly to. So they ultimately had to take refuge in the British official spaces that were there in British official houses. Now, we see people like Henry Lawrence, who was the chief commissioner of the British, also being taken there, and he took his family and basically had to stay back in the British official houses because they did not have a place to go. And at that point of time, the army, the Indian sepoys were going towards a crazy chaos, basically taking away from the British whatever regions belonged to them and killing a lot of Englishmen. Now, in order to stop that, we see that Colin Campbell is leading the army, who is the commander-in-chief of the British forces. Now, when Colin Campbell decided to lead the army, what they particularly did first was, because Lucknow had become the hot seat of the rebellion at that point of time, we see Birjis Qadir was made the Nawab of Awadh in 1857 to kind of stop the rebellion. He was made the puppet ruler per se, but Begum Hazrat Mahal could not be contained, and the rebellion went ahead and the revolt kept on going. So we see Colin Campbell lead the army. He headed the English and the Gurkha regiment, and he went to Lucknow and recaptured it. So can you tell me who led the revolt in Lucknow? Was it Nana Sahib, Wajid Ali Shah, Begum Hazrat Mahal, or Mangal Pandey? The answer will be Begum Hazrat Mahal. Now, it was not just Lucknow, and as we discussed that the fire of the revolt had spread across the subcontinent. So we see that Kanpur is also rising in rebellion. If you remember that Kanpur was at that point of time taken by Nana Sahib, who was basically deported to Kanpur after Nagpur had been taken away, because Nana Sahib was the adopted son of Peshwa Baji Rao II, and Nagpur was taken away from Nana Sahib on the basis of the doctrine of lapse. Now, when he went to Kanpur, he started to gather people for the rebellion, and he started to gather the army so that he could lead the rebellion. So we see that Nana Sahib led the rebels in Kanpur. Now, against Nana Sahib, we see Henry Havelock capturing Kanpur in 1857. So after Nana Sahib led the revolt in Kanpur, after a point of time, Henry Havelock leads the British and he takes Kanpur from Nana Sahib. But we see an able general of Nana Sahib, who was Tatya Top, recapture Kanpur in 1857 from the British. But in a constant battle, the region of Kanpur again went on to Colin Campbell. Campbell's army defeated Nana Sahib's army in a battle on 6 December and recaptured Kanpur in 1857. And finally Kanpur went to the British, and Tatya Top, he left Kanpur for the other place of rebellion. Now we shift our focus to Jhansi. If you remember, Jhansi also was a kingdom that had fallen to the doctrine of lapse, because Rani Lakshmi Bai was acting as a regent for her son Damodar Rao, who was also an adopted child. Now Rani Lakshmi Bai led the revolt in Jhansi along with the help of Tatya Top. We see that the valor and courage with which Rani Lakshmi Bai fought. She had led the army in Jhansi all by herself, and interestingly enough, Rani Lakshmi Bai was the only woman to lead the revolt all by herself in 1857. So after Jhansi was taken by the British, when British were being led by Sir Hugh Rose, we see Rani move towards Kalpi. So she crossed the Kalpi river, and along with Tatya Top, she kept fighting Sir Hugh Rose in constant battles, which were successful at that point of time as well. But after the scene shifted from Kalpi to Gwalior, we see that there is a defeat that Rani Lakshmi Bai and Tatya Top face. What exactly happened was the king of Gwalior, the leader of Gwalior, betrayed Rani Lakshmi Bai and informed the British about their arrival in Gwalior. So we see that the forces of Rani Lakshmi Bai and Tatya Top joined together also could not defeat the British forces led by Sir Hugh Rose. In fact, Sir Hugh Rose later stated his admiration towards the valor and courage that Rani Lakshmi Bai, being a woman, showcased in the battle.
Rao साहब, अब ज़्यादा सोच विचार करने का समय नहीं है. अब फौरन निर्णय लीजिए आप. तात्या ने जबरदस्त बहादुरी दिखाई, फिर भी कानपुर हमारे हाथ से निकल गया है. नाना साहब से भी हम दूर पड़ गए. पता नहीं वो कहां होंगे अब. लेकिन निराश होने से तो कुछ नहीं होगा ना. हमें योजना बनाकर आगे बढ़ना चाहिए. मैदान की लड़ाई जीतने से पहले मन के भीतर की लड़ाई जीतनी होगी राव साहब.
तेरी तो नारी पर मर्दानी, रानी झांसी की अभिमानी, रंजन जीवन लड़ी अंत तक उसने हार नहीं मानी. उसने हार नहीं मानी, उसने हार नहीं मानी. रानी का बलिदान देख कर तात्या टोपे लड़ा साल भर. आखिर वो और राव साहब भी चढ़ गए फांसी के तख्ते पर. आखिर वो और राव साहब भी चढ़ गए फांसी के तख्ते पर. चढ़ गए फांसी के तख्ते पर. चढ़ गए फांसी के तख्ते पर.
In the particular video, you saw how exactly the rebellion was led by Rani Lakshmi Bai, who stated this very fact that we will have to win over our minds to win over the war. So this is how she exactly gave boost to the people, to her army to lead the revolt. Now, as we have stated it earlier as well, that these were not the only pockets of rebellion that we are talking about. We see that Maulavi Ahmadullah Shah leading the revolt from Faizabad. Bareilly is being led by Khan Bahadur Khan. Jagadishpur led by Kunwar Singh, who was a Jamindar of Jagdishpur. So ultimately, though these pockets rose in rebellion, we do have to realize that the Indian sepoys were not victorious against the Britishers. The revolt of 1857 was not a victory in part of the Indians. Why so? What exactly, made this to be a failure, and the reasons behind it is something that we do need to discuss about. The first factor and the most important was that the British centers like Bengal, Madras, Bombay did not participate in the revolt. So we see that these pockets are, going into a revolt like that of Jhansi, Awadh, other places of Bihar. But the main areas of Bengal, Madras and Bombay, which held economic importance for the British, did not rise up in the rebellion. And ultimately the British understood that because they did not have to tackle these main centers of trade, of economy, it was easier for them to tackle the remaining areas. The second point is that the regional groups and rulers like that of the Sikhs, Gurkhas, Pathans, the Nizam of Hyderabad, Sindhia and Bhosles of the Maratha region provided active support to the British. So we see that the Sikh regiment, the Gurkha regiment is being called, and these are the people fighting to repress the Indian sepoys. So it was a brother fighting against the other brother to repress them in this entire revolt and entire uprising. So you can understand how the British drew backing from the Indians themselves. So obviously not everyone was revolting. So revolt of 1857, contrary to the belief, was not a popular uprising. Next point, we see that different rulers across the country taking part in the rebellion lacked coordination amongst themselves, leading to an overall lack of unity. Now, as we have learnt till this point of time, that Bahadur Shah II also could not give leadership because he was deported to Rangoon. Therefore, we understand there was no particular leader who could lead the revolt of 1857. Though we have seen many faces, many heroes like that of Rani Lakshmi Bai, Tatia Top, Nana Sahib come forward and give their leadership in this revolt of 1857, but it was not unified. There was no unity in facing the British colonizers who had a unified army. Now, the rebels used outdated war techniques and the leaders lacked coordination and planning amongst themselves. This becomes the most important point, because we have to remember that the Indian sepoys are fighting, are going against the colonizers, the British, who had war techniques and war ammunitions which were, of number 1 ranking at that point of time. In fact, interesting point was that the British were already using these Enfield rifles that had started the revolt in the first place. So the cumbersome techniques that Britishers were using, the Indians could not tackle with, and ultimately failed in the entire activity. Now, if you look at the map right here, we can see that the solid pink areas are the areas of British Empire. The areas that are marked in green are the dependent states of, under the British, basically dependent states were the ones who had signed the subsidiary alliance, who gave the virtual administrative powers to the British, but in reality, they were still there, as in they were puppet princesses. So we can see that Hyderabad, areas in northwestern provinces, Awadh, areas of Bihar, all these were dependent states. Next we come to the strongest rebellious activity. So basically we can state that the striped portion is the portion of northern and kind of central Indian subcontinent portion was the portion that had the stronghold of rebellion. So this was the major place that primarily rose to rebellion in 1857, and the ones marked in star, which is that of Jhansi, Awadh, Lucknow, Delhi, Meerut were the centers of rebellion, the main areas of rebellion. So we see that the rebellion primarily did not, move to per se a Deccan or even the east. So Bengal was unharmed by the revolt of 1857. Now, the nature of the revolt of 1857 has been a part of several controversies, because to understand an event that is acting as a watershed in the British Indian history is very important to understand the amount of significance that it had. So we see that it is being called a revolt firstly because ideally the people of India were said to be involved, but it cannot be called a revolt per se because not everybody in India is uprising. As we just now saw that Bengal, major portions of the south were left out in this revolt because they did not in fact rise up in revolt, and in fact there were Indian people who supported the Britishers to repress the revolt. So we cannot really state this as a revolt. Now when it came to the British historians, they stated it to be called as a sepoy mutiny, that 1857 was a sepoy mutiny because the sepoys, the army personnel, were the one who led the revolt of 1857. But that wasn't the case because we see people like Rani Lakshmi Bai, people like Tatia Tope come forward and lead the rebellion and give an amount of leadership. But again, those leaderships did not really make a unified concept that could stand in front of the Britishers. So it was not just the sepoys who were involved primarily in the mutiny. Now, interesting was the fact when nationalist personalities like that of Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and other nationalist historians as well stated it to be the first war of independence. We have also discussed the fact that V.D. Savarkar was the one who coined the term First War of Independence for the revolt of 1857. But we do have to understand that in fact, the idea of First War of Independence did not suit the revolt of 1857 or the uprising of 1857 because this was not a unified battle that India was leading. Since India did not have the nationalistic ideas at that point of time, it was not yet a unified nation per se. Interesting here is the fact which we should note that revolt of 1857 became the groundbreaking event from where we can see the nationalist ideologies, the buds of nationalist ideologies coming ahead in terms when Mangal Pandey and heroes like Rani Lakshmi Bai, Tatia Tope, Nana Sahib, they are coming forward and they are uniting to protect their motherland against the British domination. But all of these ideas, in fact the nationalist ideas, have again been differed with, and there are historians who have disagreed to this. Historians like that of Metcalfe. Thomas Metcalfe considered that the revolt was something more than a sepoy mutiny, but something less than a national revolt. Now, it was of course more than a sepoy mutiny because it was not just the sepoys, and less than a national revolt because India was not a nation yet. So we see that this becomes, the important course of the war, as we have discussed, where various pockets are uprising against the British domination. They are voicing their opinion against the British domination, and the significance of the war lay in the fact that though the nature has been a part of the controversy, a part of, whether to be called as a revolt or an uprising or the First War of Independence, it is very sure that it was a very decisive event in the history of British India, and to discuss it as a threshold of the British Indian history would have been apt. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.